It's like
I'll probably start with John Sweetman, just so that I can... Sorry?
It's like AA.
Yes?
Not that I know.
It's like AA, but I mean, you...
Funnily
often
enough, part of the process.
they've had... Yes. We can only admire them for what they've achieved. And some of us have, you know, there but for the grace of you know, Richard Dawkins go I.
There but for the chaotic function.
Yes. So, I'll get them each to tell their story. I'll start with you, John.
Okay. Well, you asked first of all what got me into it. I have to say my birth, because I grew up in a Christian family, but it wasn't a normal Christian community that I grew up in. It was actually a denomination called the Christadelphians. Now, I don't know how many of you have heard of the Christadelphians. They're some hands
Are they have the reading rooms? Is that them?
No, that's the Christian Scientists. Christadelphians don't have reading rooms.
They're very in time prophecy.
They are. They're very prophecy focused.
Is that just a little room down in Castlereagh Street? That's not Christadelphians?
I think you'll find it's a Christian Science reading room.
Is it?
Do you think there's a train line on the way to Rudy Hill?
There's quite a few of those around the place.
Yeah.
It's actually Christian Science was founded by a lady called Mary Baker Eddy.
Right.
It's quite an interesting thing. But anyway, Christadelphians are not like them in any way. They're a bit new agey, whereas Christadelphians are a Christian sect. They're like, I'd say they're a fundamentalist Christian sect. They believe in the inerrancy of the Bible. And they're very, as Andrea said, they're very prophecy focused. They're quite, like as far as Christadelphians go, there are quite a lot of them in Australia compared to other countries. It's probably more in the UK. That's really where they started, in the United Kingdom. The central office, if you like, of the Christadelphian magazine is in Birmingham, and that's sort of, and the main statement of faith that Christadelphians operate under is called the BASF, or the Birmingham Amended Statement of Faith. So that sort of points to their historical origin in about 1848.
So Nicene Creed was then.
Sort of, yes. They were actually founded by a British man called Dr. John Thomas, who actually migrated from the UK to America, and he actually founded the Christadelphians in America. Dr. Thomas, the story goes that he was on a ship from the UK to America, and it hit a big storm, and he thought it was going to sink, and everyone was very scared, and he prayed to God, and he said, you know, God, if you save my life, I will search for the true version of Christianity. And so he survived, and that's what he did. And he came up with the Christadelphian doctrines.
And it's true.
Well, according to Christadelphians,
it's a true one.
According to Christadelphians, the Christadelphian version of Christianity is the only true version of Christianity, and everyone else is in error. So they have a few unique beliefs. They're non-Trinitarian, so they're a Unitarian faith. They reject the doctrine of the Trinity, which, according to many other Christians, actually makes them non-Christian in their eyes. But they would claim to be true Christians. They have a lot of similarities with the Jehovah's Witnesses in fact. So they sort of have an aversion to these pagan parts of Christianity. Well, all of Christianity is arguably pagan in some way, but they don't observe Christmas. They don't really observe Easter in the same way that mainstream Christians do. They don't believe in a personal devil. They don't believe in a supernatural devil. They believe that the devil is a metaphor for sin, human sin in the human sinful nature. So and they sort of go into all sorts of mental gymnastics to try and explain those passages in the New Testament which pretty clearly speak of a devil and demons, but they manage to get around that in some pretty convoluted kinds of interpretations.
What about the virgin birth and the resurrection?
They do believe in the virgin birth and the resurrection, yeah.
They're not pagan beliefs.
Sorry?
They're not pagan beliefs.
They're not pagan beliefs, exactly. And
how did you get out?
So, like in about the year 2000 I moved, year 2000 I moved from Brisbane to Sydney, and it was there I started, well actually a couple of years before that in my mind I was starting to question the beliefs. I didn't go straight from Christadelphianism to atheism. I actually started to become a more open-minded Christian, if you like. I started first of all questioning the idea that Christadelphians were the only people who had the truth, and I was saying, well, it's probably not right that other Christian denominations are all going to be damned, and that Christadelphians are the only ones. I started to think, well, that's a bit stupid. And a few of their silly customs I really started to question as well. They're very exclusive. Even within the Christadelphian movement, there's a number of different schisms, which they call fellowships. And a lot of Christadelphians won't talk to other Christadelphians because they have a slight doctrinal difference, so they split. They're very fanatical like that.
Deeply Christian.
They believe in
Orthodoxy.
Well, see, they've got the truth. If you have a belief that you are right and that the Bible is inerrant, then if someone disagrees with your interpretation of the Bible, then they are seriously in error, and you have to pass on.
So
after the first and second war.
was it possible that the move from Brisbane to Sydney sort of broke the community grip?
Yes, I think so. It certainly played a part, because I had the freedom when I was down here to go to church or not go to church, and I was still going to churches down here for a while, but I started reducing my attendance, started thinking more liberally about other Christians in general, and from that I started doing research about Christianity in general. I started looking seriously at the question of evolution, because I was brought up as a creationist, a literal 7-day creationist. 6 days. And what's one extra day when you're
That's okay.
And that more than anything, the idea that evolution did actually have good scientific evidence behind it actually started for me to question the accuracy of the Genesis account. And I know many Christians these days have no problem with believing in evolution in the Bible, but for me that was a big issue. If we all evolved, and if Genesis is not a literal record, a historical record, then that has serious ramifications for the whole doctrine of Christianity, including the atonement and salvation and everything. Because so much rests on the fall and Adam's eating the apple, original sin. So that was a serious prompt for me, and that really started getting me to think not just about the exclusiveness of Christadelphianism, but the truth of Christianity more broadly. And so from there I started to open up and started reading a lot of books of John Shelby Spong. I don't know if who's heard of Bishop Spong.
Yep.
And I've got a lot of his books at home, because I went through a real Spong phase. And I still quite like him.
We'll make that a meme immediately.
Yeah. I still quite like him actually. He's good. If he came to Sydney again, I would go and visit him. Yes. And, yeah, I've got that one. That was actually the first book of Spong I read back in 2002. It was one of the first skeptical books, if you like, that I actually read, that really started to kick my skeptical apparatus into gear. And this raised a lot of interesting questions for me, and it got me thinking. And I didn't jettison the belief in God at this point. I was still, I became almost more of a deist. So look, there's a God out there that created the universe, but
if you'd actually found a community of the kind that Spong might have hoped to have.
Well, the Pitt Street Uniting Church here in Sydney is very friendly to Spong. Whenever he comes out to Australia, he always preaches at Pitt Street Uniting Church. So I went along to a lot of their talks when they had Spong out here. And so I did go to a lot of their things. And they're very liberal, that church. They're into social justice and all these sort of liberal causes. So I don't know how many of you are aware of the Uniting Church at Pitt Street. Their leader is actually, what's the name? I forget the name of the senior pastor there, but she's a lesbian and she...
McMahon.
Yes, that's right.
McMahon.
That's it?
Yeah, she's great.
And she actually leads the dykes on the bikes in the Mardi Gras every day.
You can go on it, Hell.
Yes.
Yeah. She's going to hell in so many ways.
She's enjoying it while she's going.
And anyway, she's the senior minister at Pitt Street Uniting Church, or at least was when I was young. So that's how liberal they are.
So you might, do you think, have ever settled down into that sort of congregation?
Not really, because I sort of, after a while, I started to become sceptical of the whole Spong's interpretation of it, I thought, well, is he really just kidding himself a bit? Because, you know, he doesn't, he rejects the resurrection, he rejects the virgin birth, yet he still holds on to, he still calls himself a Christian, he still says that this all has value. And it became increasingly hard for me to, you know, rationalise that. He talks about the love and the ground of being. He sort of uses these very nebulous terms to try and still make Christianity relevant, and this was increasingly relevant to me the more I looked into the evolution, cosmology.
Williams, as it were.
Yeah, and I thought, well, he's trying to hold on to both worlds, whereas like a more intellectually honest approach would be to simply say, well, look, Christianity is a religion that has been disproven through the tools of science and rational inquiry, and why try and hold on to something just for, you know, what's basically sentimental reasons, and that's where I really sort of declared myself an atheist, and that I said I didn't believe in God at all, and that sort of precipitated a real traumatic experience where I actually formally resigned from my old church, or it's actually called an ecclesia. They use the Greek word for church, the Christadelphians, and that was the time I had to break the news to my family and everything, and that was such a traumatic period in my life. You know, it was obviously really upset my family and my uncle, and
Why weren't you just gay?
yeah, sorry.
Why did you?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to do it honestly. I just didn't want to keep going along and pretending. I thought, if I'm not gonna lie about it. I'm gonna be open and honest, and I'll go through all this pain, and it was a lot of pain and trauma, but I went through it.
I mean, at least if you were gay, they could have cured you of that. I mean,
Well,
Are they all praying for you, John?
well, I'm sure they were, but nowadays I'm sort of, we don't, the subject of religion doesn't come up much between me and my family, and we all get on pretty well, so it's good.
Okay. That's an excellent start. Thank you very much.
Just one question. How representative do you think of your experiences is of other people leaving your particular branch of faith?
Well, there's actually a Facebook group which I'm a part of, where it's for ex-Christadelphians, and a lot of people report very similar stories. There's a lot of ex-Christadelphians have gone through much worse situations than I have. They've been in much more extreme churches, because there's no centralised hierarchy in Christadelphia. They don't have like their own pope or bishop. Every church is independent. There are umbrella organisations that sort of unite.
So there's no systematic or organised persecution and harassment of people that leave, or
no
formal process.
No, thankfully it's not
outcasting
like that.
kind of
No, it's up to each church to try and I got a lot of letters from my old church and from members trying to talk me into coming back.
Right.
But it's not like the Scientologists.
But that's
where
pretty mild mannered.
Exactly. Yeah, it's pretty mild.
Suppressive
It wasn't
person.
much. They gave up pretty soon. Put it that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, John. Look, Joel, would you like to tell us your story?
Oh, sure. Hi. Look, I was invited to talk to a sitting atheist in a few weeks.
2 weeks, yeah.
There you go. And so you'll probably get a sense from a lot of us there's a lot of commonality between our experiences. I suppose I tend to define mine as in many respects it's like losing an addiction to heroin, losing your taste for it. Not that I've been addicted to heroin, but I'm informed that it's quite good. But you have this overwhelming sense of need, and so for mine, much like John, I was raised in not Christadelphian, but in a AOG church.
Assemblies of God.
Oh, yeah, sorry. But I just talk like you know. Yeah, and tongues and demons and end times prophecies, and I was in a particularly fruity brand of the church. And Andrea and I actually crossed paths at one point. We were our churches existed because of the church that we both originated in. They're called church plants, where they started smaller churches outside. Yeah, essentially. And so Andrea went one way, I went the other. But where the particular brand I ended up in got caught into something called the Toronto Outpouring, and then there was the Pensacola Blessing, and it was all based around the world was going to end, and somewhere between 97 and 99. And
Was this in Australia or?
Yeah.
no, these are like the one with
Yes, all this
Canada,
was
Canada and
Came out
Florida.
at the same
What are you saying?
time.
All
Yeah,
of this took
but-
place here.
But this was very much very real, very happening in the western suburbs of Sydney. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's going to end, we're just going to work out when
Yeah.
97 and 99 are going to come.
Oh no, well when it didn't happen in 97 it was like, well, it's really like the Harold Camping thing. Everyone's heard of Harold
Oh,
Camping?
yeah,
I'm sure.
yeah.
It's a bit hard to miss him. But they're like, oh no, like, they basically explained it so neatly inside biblical prophecy as to why that wasn't the end, and said, look, that's alright, we know this is the beginning of the end, and by 99 we expect 3.5 years of problems, and then it'll all be over. So I was, told in no uncertain terms not to bother with my education and just focus on making sure my friends were Christian, which I did, and I must tell you I'm pretty good at getting people to become a Christian. I was a youth pastor for the church for a couple of years, and that was pretty much my life's aspiration up until I sort of discovered there wasn't a God, and that was obviously a bit of a crisis for me because I was out of a job. So it was a matter of thinking, and if you find my suffering funny, feel free to laugh at it because I often do. No, you get to this stage where you go, well, at least I'm happy out now to have found out for myself. And
How did you find out?
well, look, realistically, bad heroin joke aside, it's a method. Like I always look at it like I always use the example like 4 legs of a chair, and there's all these different elements that hold your belief structure together. And like John, and I'm sure like other people here, I was raised with creation science. Oh, God, I hate saying it like that. Creationism, and I had no concept of science, no real concept of science at all into my mid-20s, which is horrible because thinking back on these conversations that I've had with people who did understand science and thinking I was having some sort of intelligent conversation with them and trying to, and talk, just, the things now that you hear and you immediately chuckle. Now immediately the things I'm talking about, right? Evolution's just a theory, we evolved, how many birds jumped out of a tree before the one beside it, behind it decided to evolve wings. All this moronic shit. And it's just, but it was so innocent on my part. I had no sense. My science teachers were quite literally in our church and my school where they just didn't teach evolutionary theory at all. Ken Ham was actual Ken Ham.
Oh, wow.
When he was teaching, was showing up to church once every couple of months, doing these workshops where he was telling us how man and dinosaurs walk together and everything else. And
So what? How did you?
Oh, how?
So you became interested. How did you learn?
One was a TAFE course. I was working in social work, and I'm actually doing it again now, but until mid-2007, and I lost a job, and I went and did a TAFE course in tourism in the Blue Mountains, where we had a guy kept taking us out into the mountains and showing us and talking just in plain terms about
strata.
Yeah. And I lived there my whole life, and I actually stood by complete coincidence at the end of Darwin's Walk, but I didn't even register me at the time. I was just there. I'm staring, and he was explaining how some of the sediment that washes out of the Blue Mountains can be traced to Fraser Island. Some small, where it washes out up the Hawkesbury and then gets washed up the coastlines, and is deposited on Fraser Island. And they said, and I just stand there going, that can't have been 6,000 years. It can't. And the only thing I went, that can't have been. And they said, like, this is enough for speculation. We can trace, these. It's not. There's no dodgy anything in it. This is just what it takes. And so it takes about 6 weeks for these pieces to make themselves up. And look how large this island is. It says it's not all made up of this, obviously, but. And then you look at the levels of the. I'm like. Just, and by the way, you're standing on ironstone at this moment. So if you want to think about, floodwaters and all this sort of thing, which is really the terms of reference. Pretty shortly after that, Richard Dawkins published the God Delusion book, and the church made this enormous fuss about no one reading it.
Did it work?
And I just went, what? I'd never heard anything like that before from the church. Maybe when I was a child, they'd made some fuss about the satanic verses, which was kind of much like, in the 80s when the Anglicans said, "Don't watch The Life of Brian." I mean, that was a real thing, It's completely missing the point. Yeah, exactly. Like, don't read Harry Potter. But they said this thing, don't read that. It's a really bad book. It'll corrupt your faith.
Right.
It's just a book. Like, what? How can it possibly? So I kept it secret even from my wife. And I'm sitting with this book, and just had it in a drawers beside my bed, and I could pull it out. And
They had it inside a Playboy.
Playboy, Playgirl, so good.
Yeah. Scientific porn. It was quite good. Well, it was really lovely. Just these really basic, and I loved the fact that he didn't talk down. He just, if you didn't understand what was being said, get a dictionary out and learn. And I absolutely loved it. And so more than anything, and at the time when I was reading it, obviously I had these massive problems talking about other legs of faith. I was having major, and I had done for numerous years, major moral problems with what was going on in the church. My father's disabled, has epilepsy and is has an intellectual disability. And never once, ever in my life, would ever accept me discriminating against anyone for any reason whatsoever. And I couldn't reconcile that with, the church's treatment of women in general, and its attitude towards the homosexual community was just appalling. Particularly our church was just, we had a girl in our church who was raped by a father. Father went to a different church, and she fell pregnant twice to her father. And the church's response with this, now you've got to understand that at least 3 of us here are very, very good at having the Pentecostal, the look of love, I like to call it, the faux glint in the eye and the look of compassion for someone. And so if you can imagine that look, and I'll spare you it.
Oh, don't give us that.
So carry on.
Oh no, it's just this really, it's just, look, I'm really, the lean forward thing, it's really, we want you to know that we really care about you, and we're really thinking about you this moment, but, we really need to pray for you, to seek God's forgiveness for murdering those children. But it was said with that really soft, loving compassion, not let's work on getting you into grief counselling and perhaps pursuing charges against your father. Let's seek forgiveness for the murder that you've just committed.
You mean abortion?
Yeah, the abortion.
Of course, the doctors obviously went to hospital. The doctors, of course, said, well, this is a no-brainer. This has to, you have to have termination here. It wasn't a question. It was just, let's get this done. She was 13 years old, I think, the first time she fell pregnant. And I was just so gobsmacked by the I said, how? And I was staff at the time. I said, sorry, but could you just explain to me how you came to that you thought that was the right thing to say? Now this girl is now, of course, on all sorts of different antipsychotic medications, and life is an absolute shambles, which is not surprising. Not exactly helped by the church's response. And then their attitude in general, I mean, I lived a very sheltered life as it was, but, I started to meet members of, particularly the gay community, and, they weren't all these broken men who had mummy issues, they weren't, all the crap in the church. And so all these things very slowly challenged, and you're very well trained by the church to knock all these things on the head when they arise, and it's every time there is a problem, it's what Al spoke about before, about negative faith, where this is my problem, I need to correct this behaviour in myself. And eventually I got to the stage where I said, I'm actually sick of trying to correct myself. I'm actually quite like who I am, and if you don't like it, then I shouldn't be here. On those grounds, and I thought, well, maybe I'll try changing churches, and then it suddenly dawned on me very succinctly that the church had been flat out, like Ken Ham had just been flat out lying about, you know, creationism, about the way, you know, why we are how we are, and it was, and there's no two ways about it. It's just flat out garbage, and I couldn't come to any other conclusion but that, and I felt it'd be incredibly dishonest of me to even pretend to stay. At the same time, I didn't really want to be harassed by the churches, so I did, like, I just said to Andrea, I did the rope-a-dope on the church. Told one church I was going to another church, told that church I was going to another. And they all, it's great, because they all call each other looking for where you are to try and keep track of you, and then I went. And so, and then it was about 8 or 9 months later, and they went, 8 or 9 months later, and I finally got a call from someone going, oh, we heard you're not going to church anymore. I went, yeah, okay. Thanks for calling, you know. You know, see you later.
From the time you had the, you know, iron stone to an island revelation to the time when you committed to leave, what was that time span?
About 4 months. But keep in mind.
Oh
but
yeah,
keep in
I
mind,
was thinking it was years.
No. There was, the years were like, so, you know, when the like moral objections started arising, and like my I mentioned like my dad having some issues. My dad, in the midst of when the world was ending, of course, my dad tried to kill himself, and so I and my mum got to the stage. My mum's a great woman, you know, and she's still part of these churches and still, you know, praying that her son doesn't go to hell. Now, on the other side, you know, so on the other side of that, she, you know, they'd put up, you know, 20 years of that and said, look, I can't do it. You either have to get help, or our relationship needs to come to an end. And the church, of course, responded in its usual compassionate way and said, has he committed adultery, then you're not allowed to divorce. And she said, oh, can't deal with this crap anymore. She went to a different church. He left and he's remarried and is actually doing really well. But so yeah, in the, like, sort of in the midst of all that, I was like, so in there, I'm like, the church's response, these people who swear that they're closer than your blood are nowhere to be found. They have no answers at all, no real help at all. You know, I was a 16-year-old having monstrous like anxiety, like panic attacks, having no idea how to deal with them, having people pray, me praying over myself, trying to get the demons out of me, rather than actually getting help. You know, yeah, it's amazing that how I actually went and did get, you know, cognitive behaviour therapy and haven't had an anxiety attack in 6 years. You know, in the space of, you know, but you know, 10 years of prayer didn't seem to do much. So there was, you know, there was that, and I guess it's kind of like one step out the door, and then, you know, all you've got left is you standing there with a smile on your face going, I need to be here because I don't know what I'll do if I go. I'll lose, you know, everyone that I've known for my entire life. And I just got to the point where I said, well, I'd rather be alone. If I have to be here just smiling and paying lip service and pretending, you know, that this is something, you know, worth investing my time in, then I'd rather just take my chances and chance on the outside. Now it took me a couple of years actually to really even begin to adjust to that. I was legitimately concerned about whether my marriage would hold up under the weight of what I did, and I had to accept at some point that if she went, no, I can't deal with this, and that would have to be the case, which is not an easy thing to accept, but that's what I had to do. And I went back to working doing disability care, which is what I'm still doing, and just this year I decided I'd take on a Bachelor of Criminology to actually have a go at an actual career that might actually do some good rather than being a pastor, which, you know, is good for sleeping in and everything else, but not much. Yeah, and for the record, as it turns out, I was able to go around and find a lot of the kids from the youth group that I had. We had about probably close to 90 kids at one stage in the youth group, and I was very pleased to go around and find that they were actually able to think for themselves, and they're all hopelessly lost in their faith. They've all sort of, well, the ones that I found anyway, sort of moved on and you know, got on with their lives, and which is quite.
Yeah, have you thought of capitalising on that? Obviously, ability you've got to convert people to that faith and actually turn it around.
if you could imagine, I was spending my life being an evangelist. I'm not
Okay.
particularly the idea of becoming one again doesn't really appeal to me that much. And I think the selling, like I mean, I think atheism should sell itself. It
Well,
doesn't.
It's already got a bad name.
It doesn't. Sorry, not to answer yours. It has plenty to offer, but I don't see any real organisation that says, like, you know, and I don't think it needs one. I would really be upset if we ever saw the day where, you know, atheism was branded like another denomination or a separate. It's not. I mean, how do you get from atheism, like no God, to
Well, it's a problem that anybody
I don't know.
got that particular set of ideas. What do you call yourself? What do you do with this? Or as you asked before, what use is it?
I think the answer is he's converted into my particular brand of faith, which is you're a scientific naturalist.
Sure.
In terms of that as one aspect, and as a
I heard
side
someone
effect of
say
that.
I'm a big believer in now. I actually want, you know, tangible physical evidence for something that can be demonstrated before I will give it any assent.
I had you last because you gave
Anyway, thank you for that. That was excellent.
Oh, thank you very much.
Alaric.
I actually think there's good reasons to start a secular religion myself.
Yeah,
That's not what the panel's about. So. I'm really ashamed of my conversion, to be honest. I was 18 years old, loved science when I was at school, and was converted on the basis that the story in creation is logically equivalent to the evidence in the fossil record and everything else. So no good reason, really. The reason, I think, on reflection, came down to I was psychologically unstable. I didn't really think much of myself, and it offered a social structure and a belief structure that was safe and, you know, tight, and maybe I needed that at the time. I don't know, but to go in with no good reason like that and then to swallow the whole thing was, that was.
Where did this happen? This happened at a church or
at a university, believe it or not. My friend was going to University of New South Wales, and one of the chaplains there got in his ear, and we did a bit of backwards and forwards, me shooting down the arguments that he came home with, and then I went and saw him, and I don't know what happened. Still, scratching my head.
Were they recruiting you in some way?
Yeah, they were eventually.
But I mean, were they sort of, because you went on to do a lot more, and did they see that?
Oh well, they like
potential with you.
I guess a couple of months after that, I was marching with Fred Nile. So I know, and wondering what all the homosexuals are so upset about. Like, what the fuck? We're doing this lovingly. Didn't understand it. So yeah, really kind of, and I guess like with my talk before, when I was talking about all these little kind of things that culturally kind of allow for that stupid decision, you know, like this idea that there is some spiritual dimension, that, you know, that science can't explain everything, that you know, there's more things on heaven and earth and all that sort of crap. All those little things kind of allow something as stupid as fundamentalist Christianity to slip in the door, and once it's got you, it's pretty much, it's really hard to get out.
So you're attracted by the sheer overwhelming. I mean, if it's all true and you're in on it, then it's,
I think
it's a,
yeah.
Know, there's a kick you get out of that.
There's an element of that. I think, and that's I think, like conspiracy theories are like that as well. I know something, and, you you know, that most people don't know, and you know, I've got the inside information and I know better than you. Kind of a puffing yourself up sort of thing. Not with me so much. I was just happy that there were answers, and easy answers, I think. So from that moment on, I read my Bible constantly. Like within the first 2 years, I think I'd read it through cover to cover twice, and the New Testament probably 4 or 5 times.
Were you part of a congregation?
Yes, scary congregation. Like Christadelphians are walking the park next to these guys. These were hardcore American fringe fundamentalist groups. So there was this thing in the church called the dating revelation, which basically meant if you were attracted to a member of the opposite sex within the church, then you'd have to pray to God to see if that was God's will that you were attracted to that person. And then if you felt that your prayer was answered, that yes, you were attracted to that person, then you'd go to your pastor if you're a male, pastor's wife if you're female, and then they would pray about it, and then they would ask the other, like the wife or the husband, whether the girl had got the same word and you know what they thought of it. And after all that vetting, after all that vetting had happened, then you were allowed to go on a date with a chaperone. Yeah. So
did you ever get laid?
no.
You've been trying.
No. And that's the thing. From 18 to 24, there was none of that getting laid. So. No. People say, "What have I got against Christianity?"
Yeah.
That's pretty bad. So yeah, all this stuff about all the bullshit stories in the Old Testament and all that sort of stuff. Not a problem for me.
So when did you decide what happened again?
The deconversion? A big part of that was the church folded and we went to another church, Christian City Church Macquarie. The pastor there was an ex-Christian brother who'd actually studied. No, I wasn't molested. Actually, that would have been
That's what I was doing.
Yeah, at least you could have claimed some kind of sex life by that point.
Exactly.
So not going there.
So, but he was really good, and he and then I went to uni, and basically I was doing mathematics. I had a minor in religion at Australian Catholic University. I was planning on being a teacher, and the minor in religion became really problematic really fast.
Did you have sex at uni?
No.
It
It gets worse than that.
Have you had sex since then?
Oh yeah. I made up for it since.
Sorry, is that at uni or during the period whilst you were studying?
I thought that was worth a round of applause in and of itself.
See, yeah, no, that was bad. In '92, summer of '92, I went because my father was Swedish, so I got invited by his family to go over there. I'd never been there before, and I spent 3 months trying to convert gorgeous Swedish women to Christianity and celibacy. And you say, what have I got against Christianity? Don't get me started. That's bad. So
they managed to convert you.
No, well, actually, it was coming back from there. It did help. It helped a lot, because around that time there was the crisis of that was my second year of uni, so that crisis was building and building. I just wish I'd started uni maybe a year earlier. I could have gone to Sweden and let loose. police or something. But yeah, so and in terms of deconversion, I had a lot of really supportive people around me at the time. My pastor especially would never give me a straight answer. Like when I'd go to him and I'd say, look, you know, I'm struggling with this, what's going on? And he'd just smile and look at me and go, it's a really good question. Like,
He was an atheist, wasn't he?
no, he's a true believer, and to this day, like I kind of assumed he was afterwards, and went back to talk to him, and he was like horrified that I was an atheist. But yeah, and so a lot of really supportive people who would never would see that I was struggling, like my lecturers as well, see that I was struggling with stuff, would never sort of heap on too much, were really compassionate in that way. So I'm really thankful to them. And yeah, so continued on with that, and I actually remember the moment where it broke, because you've got to understand as well, with all of this sort of indoctrination, there's this idea that the devil's always trying to lead you astray. The devil's always trying to put doubt in your mind. And so you get to a certain point, and then it's like, no, what if it's the devil leading me astray and everything? So, which is what I was talking about before, like with the negative faith, like the negative, it's like that defense mechanism of, you just can't go there. That's hellfire and all that sort of stuff. So, but eventually, and I called it the Holy Spirit at the time, which is, the still small voice. Like I was struggling with this, and I was up all night, tossing and turning, couldn't sleep, and this little voice just said, "What are you willing to risk to find the truth? Like, how far are you willing to go to find the truth? Like, does it matter? And if you're truly, I guess, truly seeking, then surely, no matter what you question, you'll come back with the right truth. So that God's real, that Jesus was real, all that sort of stuff. Like, if you keep looking for truth, then eventually you'll have to come upon that as the final conclusion, if that is the truth. And that's kind of when it all broke, and then, like, I imagine it's the same as everyone here. You go through this kind of desert of just having nothing to base your life on. Like, you just, your whole belief system, your whole life, and everything that you thought it was based on is no longer there, and you've got to go through this painstaking thing of, hang on, that's what I used to believe, but I don't believe the basis of that now, so what do I think now? And and I got a shorthand of that, which was, okay, if it's not vitally important, like if it's not core doctrinal, I'm just going to say, if I accept this belief, what sort of person will it make me? And I had this idea that I was going to base it on what I thought Jesus was. So, does the action of Jesus say that he would have believed something along these lines? Sort of thing. So that's how I started to throwing everything out. And then I still wanted to be Christ-like. Didn't think that church or Christianity even gave an option for that, because all you did is pretty much wait around till God did it, and pray and have faith. And I saw the Eastern traditions sort of had a methodology, if you do this and this and this. So I went to Buddhism, and that's what led me to atheism, because the core doctrine of Buddhism is anatta, which is no soul, no God. And I put that to one side when I started meditation, everything. But it was always there, and I was finishing my studies as well. So, and religion is kind of like, the political party or the sausage factory. Like, once you see how it's made, you can't eat it anymore. Like,
Did you finish the minor in religion?
I became a major, so I double majored mathematics and religion. Because by the time I was an atheist, I only had 2 units left to be a major. So I struggled through those last 2 units.
So you did them, right?
Yeah.
That's great.
Thank God for that.
I know. So yeah, so that's.
So basically, education did it for you then, really.
Yes, yes. But education within a context too. I think I think had I been in a different sort of environment, I might have dropped out of uni. But yeah, the supportive people around me at the time kind of. I think eventually the sheer weight of evidence would have given way, would have broken the spell, I guess. But I was just really lucky that in a short space of time, like a few years, that I had all these things come together, and there was the right support as well as the education. So yeah.
I think there's something about you that would have brought that support out in people too. I think that you sort of command a certain something.
Thank you.
You do. Okay, well, thank you very much, Alaric. Andrea, you told us some of your stories.
I told you some of
I
my
know you've got
stories.
lots of stories, but
I got lots of stories. I've actually brought a show and tell book here. What can I say? Just like I said before, fundamentalist. I ended up being really Pentecostal. I was a prayer warrior. I converted kids.
He's a prayer warrior.
Tell him. Oh,
spiritual
boy.
warfare.
Spiritual warfare. You know that. Yeah, no.
so what you're dealing with demons.
Oh yeah, I casted out demons. Yeah.
It's all scripturally based, so
Yes.
there's certain passages in
Yes.
Peter, 1 Peter and 2
There it is.
Peter.
Come on.
No, don't do it.
Anyway, I had many converts. I somehow managed to convert a whole stack of teenage girls that were in a refuge once, and I baptized them all with the church. It was horrible.
So you're going to say teenage boys, alright? Well,
No.
so teenage boys are the easiest on earth, I should stress, by the way, because they just follow their
Did
instincts.
you ever attempt to get in touch with those teenage girls again and tell them they were wrong?
No, they are all gone. They're missing in action. I don't know where they are. They are very troubled girls, so any help is really good at by that stage. That's all I was sticking to. Anyway, so yeah, and like I said, I was very involved in the church, and gave all my time. Yeah.
How did you get access to girls in a refuge?
Because what happened was, I met a girl, a blind girl named Crystal. I don't know if anyone's met her in the Blue Mountains. She's a character. Anyway, she was at a church camp once, and no one was helping her, and she couldn't get the cornflakes in the bowl and everything. And I said, and I took her under my wing, and I helped her, and I walked around with her and everything, and we became friends. And I would take her out, but she was a ward of the state. Her father had abused her, her mother had died, and she was a blind girl, and she was only 14, and she was living in a refuge in Springwood. And so I would take her to church and things like this, and then she had friends that were there, and the girls were needy. I mean, they were and then they went out into the communities, and they had malnutrition, and anyway, so there was an Aboriginal girl, there was a blind girl, there was a very skinny anorexic malnourished girl, and a redheaded girl. That's all.
The complete
I mean, they were so troubled. They were troubled.
You don't realise how lucky you are.
Troubled children. Anyway, yeah, but that's beside the point. But just to paint the picture, but after I had my last daughter, there was a difficulty in the church that we were both sort of connected with, as it turned out. And I had to, basically I moved. He just filled me in the gossip of what they were saying about me after I left. That was good. That's the third person that was telling me that. So I went to another church, but again, like I was saying before, the issues that I started writing a long list of verses that were troublesome to me, that weren't making sense to me, and it was a growing list of pages, and I'm like, this is no good. And I was trying to, I listened to, I don't know if you ever heard of Chuck Mishler, people like that. But you've heard of him. So he was. I tried to get as much sort of more academic sort of theological sort of material as I could, and I was just lacking completely to satisfy the questions that I had. And anyway, so look, I prayed my way out of my Christian faith. I was full on till the moment I prayed my way out. And I actually said to God, now I'm going to pray my way out. If you're going to come, you better come now. You need to say something now. You need to stop me now, because I'm about to pray to you. And I literally said, enough, I'm done. I went into my room, I got on my knees, and I prayed my way out, and I said, God, I don't believe in you anymore. You don't even exist. And that was the end. And you know what? At that moment, I had an epiphany. At that moment, and this is the last like Pentecostal thing that ever happened to me, right? So as I prayed that prayer, in my mind, it was like a mountain, this massive mountain. And it was a mountain that I had built myself from a child, from an infant, of all the layers and layers of lies and doctrine and all of this stuff, Christianity. And it just came crashing down, and it was dust, and it was nothing.
Wonderful.
And that was it. And I was done. And then when I said, well, who is Yahweh Elohim? That's what I said to myself. So what I did was I started a journal immediately. And
that's
right, my front page. And I said this to my, what page have I written it on? I wrote something here. It's close. Anyway, I basically said something like, there's what I said this morning. There's a difference between, the Old Testament God and the New Testament God. What do you want? Do you want truth or do you want faith? And I basically wrote that in my book. And then I started, and I ended up with all these are, every page has got a study, and day after day and night after night, for year after year, I just absorbed myself in biblical study. And I just
You'll never get it back.
But I love, this is the time, but then it was more of an academic exercise for me.
Mm-hmm.
And for the first few months I spent weeping on the floor, because I just discovered one thing after another, lie after lie after lie, that I had been spun and told, and lies that cost me money, lies that cost me my time and my, I could have gone into being a professional secular singer, for example. I'd done the hard time as a, learning at the conservatorium up there and everything, and you know what, I just gave it all to the church, and so I was bitter for a long time about it.
You mean if you put your bread out on the water, it doesn't come back to you?
Yeah, it didn't come back at all.
Usually like ducks eat it.
I know, or fish, or bacteria.
But can I suggest an exercise that'd be much more useful than crying on the floor?
Yeah.
Drinking on the floor.
Other things on the floor too. Yeah. So there you go. So
I'm still picturing underneath.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So, but for me, it was after that became the most exciting, liberating journey. I didn't call myself an atheist. I didn't even really know what that was at first. I just went, I know I just don't believe in any religions and any gods. And I just started from there. And I, like you, I stripped everything I'd ever believed away and rebuilt everything from the ground up. Every political sort of leaning, every ethical, sort of idea. Everything I learnt, I started reading science books, and I just can't get enough, and I still can't get enough. I'm just totally absorbed in learning. And
that gets to be fun after a while, but when you first start,
At
it's
first it's very
just
scary.
so,
You think it's scary
horrible.
moving in on that cusp of that prayer. I was like, I don't know, I'm just full of fear. And then the moment I stepped over to the other side, I was like, where? There was no
So
fear.
did everyone have like supernatural experiences when they were in?
No, I didn't have any real supernatural experiences, but the Christadelphians played down that thing a lot, so it was sort of a doctrinal thing. They weren't like the Pentecostals. Someone had an experience that was frowned upon, that was like the Pentecostals. It was all, they were a very academically sort of inclined sect, if you know what I mean.
There's a doco on the ABC iView right now in a series called Am I Normal, which is about religious experience, and they have one part where they put a guy talking in tongues into a imaging scanner and look at what his brain's doing. Fascinating to have it.
That's interesting.
Look it up on iView, and basically one of the things they suggested when they looked at the scans was there are signs which are very similar to, say, Buddhist practices with a absence of mind, and there is a disconnect from the cognitive centers that drive speech, but your brain's still turning. So when people have this sort of glossalia experience, it's possible for it to not entirely be artificial and made up, and they're actually switched on. But it's part of brain process, and the language centers are going, just nobody's home. So really, really quite fascinating neuroanatomy sort of study on iView right now. iView is the ABC's catch-up service.
It's certainly not made up.
Yeah, but what's interesting is
Can I just ask, so you kept married?
Yes, the moment my husband was a closet non-believer. All his life he was a closet non-believer, and the moment I gave up, he went, I'm going with you.
We can't.
I said, that's a bitch. You should.
What was that?
You should. My husband, he was a closet non-believer. I've been married 25 years. I was engaged at 17, and married at 19, and I knew him from the age of 11. And it is here earlier. And he all this time he gave me hell for being in church, but he went every week and every Sunday. And the moment I said I'm no longer a Christian, he said, "Oh, thank God for that." And he was just like, "Oh, I was so annoyed with that."
Can I quickly answer the miracles thing?
Yeah.
I had to revisit. Basically, so keeping in line with the Pentecostal thing, miracles were something that happened all the time. We expected to see them. I took a few. I need to re-examine this now. Now that I'm out and see what the actual. And so I went and found a guy that I was sure I remember as a teenager watching get healed of polio. And so I went to look. I went and found. I actually connected. Still through my mum and I went and bumped into him, made myself bump into him, and even though at the time, like when he immediately, and it's almost like self-trickery, when he'd straightened his leg out and everything else, and they said, oh, that it's going to fill out as well over time, and no, he's still walking with a chock underneath his, underneath his foot. He'd been prayed for several times, and it's usually all minor things that tend to get healed. And I remember we had Gordon Gibbs. Well, he's an evangelist guy out of Penrith who was out there, he was kind of an institution if you were in these kind of churches, and he was, renowned for going around healing people, and he used to pull people up out of wheelchairs and tell them to run around churches and all this sort of stuff. And I don't know that any of those people actually healed, whether they just had a spontaneous burst of energy, adrenaline, and did what they had to, and then they went back to their
existence. The answer is no.
Yeah,
of course. But I mean, I went to Indonesia doing like, praying for people who were supposedly being, and I can't think back now. I can't think of anything that was actually verified. No, and like even if it was, I mean.
Well, look, I don't think. The problem with that kind of line of thinking, because I've got, which I won't share this with most, but some experiences with that, is it doesn't you don't go from that place. Oh, science says this, but I've had this experience, therefore there's a God.
No,
don't move there.
No, and I wouldn't move there on that basis. It wouldn't be like, oh, hey, well, there's a verified miracle, therefore there is a.
I mean, whatever you think.
There is a Christian God because
exactly.
That would be quite, and I know that's quite ridiculous.
But that's what people do.
Okay.
Not this one.
Yep.
No.
Time's up now. Thank you very much. Fantastic from all of you.
Yeah, I'd like to say I'm really sorry we didn't film that.
And he was.
Oh, you are something.
It's a miracle.
I know. A gift from God.
That was
excellent.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're really impressed.
Very
Better than any
personal and
Q&A.
revealing and very informative.
Yeah.
The surface
Ian,
stuff.
you're not